Nebula, everyone. Starseeker Williams here. And we're gonna do more Mistborn reading. Apologies if I look a little weird. I am sitting to the side so that it's a little more comfortable. Even made some tea. Always some nice herbal tea. And so far in the book, we have had Vin and Kelsier introduced. Vin as part of a thieving crew, and Kelsier as the survivor of Hath Sin. Though Vin and her crew leader got in quite a bit of trouble, and Kelsier and Doxson decided to help them out, as it were. Make sure they weren't killed. And we're on chapter 3. And I have a drink of water. Alright. We arrived in Terrace earlier this week, and I have to say I find the countryside beautiful. The great mountains to the north, with their bald snow caps and forested mantles, stand like watchful gods over this land of green fertility. My own lands to the south are mostly flat. I think that they might look less dreary if there were a few mountains to vary the terrain. The people here are mostly herdsmen, though timber harvesters and farmers are not uncommon. It is a pastoral land, certainly. It seems odd that a place so remarkably agrarian could have produced the prophecies and theologies upon which the entire world now relies. Chapter 3. Cayman counted his coins, dropping the golden boxings one by one into the small chest on his table. He still looked a bit stunned, as well he should have. 3,000 boxings was a fabulous amount of money, far more than Cayman would make in even a very good year. His closest cronies sat at the table with him, ale and laughter flowing freely. Vin sat in the corner, trying to understand her feelings of dread. 3,000 boxings. The ministry should never have let such a sum go so quickly. Prelin Aryev had seemed too cunning to be fooled with ease. Cayman dropped another coin into the chest. Vin couldn't decide if he was being foolish or clever by making such a display of wealth. Underworld crews operated within a strict agreement. Everyone received a cut of earnings in proportion to their status in the group. While it was sometimes tempting to kill the crew leader and take his money for yourself, a successful leader created more wealth for everyone. Kill him prematurely, and you would cut off future earnings, not to mention earn the wrath of the other crew members. Still, 3,000 boxings. That would be enough to tempt even the most logical thief. It was all wrong. I have to get out of here, Vin decided. Get away from Cayman and the lair in case something happens. And yet leave? By herself? She'd never been alone before. She'd always had Reen. He'd been the one to lead her from city to city, joining different thieving crews. She loved solitude, but the thought of being by herself out in the city horrified her. That was why she'd never run away from Reen. That was why she'd stayed with Cayman. She couldn't go, but she had to. She looked up from her corner, scanning the room. There weren't many people in the crew for whom she felt any sort of attachment, yet there were a couple that she would be sorry to see hurt, should the obligators actually move against the crew. A few men who hadn't tried to abuse her, or in very rare cases who had actually shown her some measure of kindness. Yulif was at the top of that list. He wasn't a friend, but he was the closest thing she had now that Reen was gone. If he would go with her, then at least she wouldn't be alone. Cautiously, Vin stood and moved along the side of the room to where Yulif sat drinking with some of the other younger crew members. She tugged on Yulif's sleeve. He turned toward her, only slightly drunk. Vin? Yulif, she whispered, we need to go. He frowned. Go? Go where? Away, Vin whispered. Out of here. Now? Vin nodded urgently. Yulif glanced back at his friends, who were chuckling among themselves, shooting suggestive looks at Vin and Yulif. Yulif flushed. You want to go somewhere? Just you and I? Not like that, Vin said. Just, I need to leave the lair, and I don't want to be alone. Vin frowned. He leaned closer, a slight stink of ale on his breath. What is this about, Vin? He asked softly. Vin hesitated. I think something might happen, Yulif, she whispered. Something with the obligators. I just don't want to be in the lair right now. Yulif sat quietly for a moment. All right, he finally said. How long will this take? I don't know, Vin said. Until evening at the least, but we have to go now. He nodded slowly. Wait here for a moment, Vin whispered, turning. She shot a glance at Cayman, who was laughing at one of his own jokes. Then she quietly moved through the ash-stained, smoky chamber into the lair's back room. The crew's general sleeping quarters consisted of a simple, elongated corridor lined with bedrolls. It was crowded and uncomfortable, but it was far better than the cold alleyways she'd slept in during her years traveling with Reen. Alleyways that I might have to get used to again, she thought. She had survived them before. She could do so again. She moved to her pallet, listening with half an ear to the muffled sounds of men laughing and drinking in the other room, then knelt down, regarding her few possessions. If something did happen to the crew, she wouldn't be able to come back to the lair. Ever. But she couldn't take the bedroll with her now. It was far too obvious. That left only the small box that contained her personal effects. A pebble from each city she'd visited. She's too blackout drunk voice. You're not wrong. Pebble from each city she'd visited, the earring Reen said Vin's mother had given her, and a bit of obsidian the size of a large coin. It was chipped into an irregular pattern. Reen had carried it as some kind of good luck charm. It was the only thing he'd left behind when he'd snuck away from the crew half a year before, abandoning her. Exactly as he always said he would, Vin told herself sternly. I never thought he'd actually go, and that's why he had to leave. She gripped the bit of obsidian in her hand and pocketed the pebbles. The earring she put in her ear. It was a very simple thing, little more than a stud, not worth stealing. Which is why she didn't fear leaving it in the back room. Still, Vin had rarely worn it, for fear the ornamentation, wow, my brain could not do that, would make her look more feminine. She had no money, but Reen had taught her how to scavenge and beg. Both were difficult in the Final Empire, especially in Luthadel. But she would find a way, if she had to. Vin left her box in bedroll, slipping back out into the common room. Maybe she was overacting. Perhaps nothing would happen to the crew, but if it did, well, if there was one thing Reen had taught her, it was how to protect her neck. Bringing Yulif was a good idea. He had contacts in Luthadel. If something happened to Cayman's crew, Yulif could probably get her and him jobs on. Vin froze right inside the main room. Apologies, I'm trying to get my tea. But it still has the leaves in it. Yulif wasn't at the table where she had left him. Instead, he stood furtively near the front of the room, near the bar, near Cayman. What is this? Cayman stood, his face red as sunlight. He pushed his stool out of the way, then lurched towards her, half drunk. Running away? Off to betray me to the ministry, are you? Vin dashed towards the stairwell door, desperately scrambling around tables and past crew members. Cayman's hurled wooden stool hit her square in the back, throwing her to the ground. Pain flared between her shoulders. Several crew members cried out as the stool bounced off her and thumped against the floorboards nearby. Vin lay in a daze. Then something within her, something she knew but didn't understand, gave her strength. Her head stopped swimming. Her pain became a focus. She climbed awkwardly to her feet. Cayman was there. He backhanded her even as she stood. Her head snapped to the side from the blow, twisting her neck so painfully that she barely felt herself hit the floor again. Cayman bent over, grabbing her by the front of her shirt, and pulling her up, raising his fist. Vin didn't pause to think or to speak. There was only one thing to do. She used up all of her luck in a single furious effort, pushing against Cayman, calming his fury. Cayman teetered for a moment, his eyes softened, he lowered her slightly. Then the anger returned to his eyes. Hard. Terrifying. "Damn wench," Cayman muttered, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her. "That backstabbing brother of yours never respected me, and you're the same. I was too easy on you both. Should've..." Vin tried to twist free, but Cayman's grip was firm. She searched desperately for aid from the other crew members, however she knew what she would find. Indifference. They turned away, their faces embarrassed but not concerned. Yulev still stood near Cayman's table, looking down guiltily. In her mind, she thought she heard a voice whispering to her. Reen's voice. "Fool! Ruthlessness! It's the most logical of emotions. You don't have any friends in the underworld. You'll never have any friends in the underworld." She renewed her struggles, but Cayman hit her again, knocking her to the ground. The blow stunned her, and she gasped, breath knocked from her lungs. "Just endure it," she told herself, her mind muddled. "He won't kill me. He needs me." Yet as she turned weakly, she saw Cayman looming over her in the dim light, drunken fury showing in his face. She knew this time would be different. It would be no simple beating. He thought that she intended to betray him to the Ministry. He wasn't in control. There was murder in his eyes. "Please," Vin thought with desperation, reaching out for her luck, trying to make it work. There was no response. Luck, such as it was, had failed her. Cayman bent down, muttering to herself as he grabbed her by the shoulder. He raised an arm, his meaty hand forming another fist, his muscles tensing, an angry bead of sweat slipping off his chin and hitting her on the cheek. A few feet away, the stairwell door shook, then burst open. Cayman hesitated, arm upraised as he glared towards the door and whatever unfortunate crew member had chosen such an inappropriate moment to return to the lair. Vin seized the distraction, ignoring the newcomer. She tried to shake free of Cayman's grip, but she was too weak. Her face blazed from where he'd hit her, and she tasted blood on her lip. Her shoulder had been twisted awkwardly, and her side ached from where she'd fallen. She clawed at Cayman's hand, but she suddenly felt weak, her inner strength failing her as her luck had. Her pain suddenly seemed greater, more daunting, more demanding. That tea's not bad. A little bit of strawberry, a little bit of apple mint, a little bit of lemon. Not bad. She turned towards the door desperately. She was close, painfully close. She had nearly escaped, just a little further. Then she saw the man standing quietly in the stairwell doorway. He was unfamiliar to her. Tall and hawk-faced. He had light blonde hair and wore a relaxed nobleman's suit, his cloak hanging free. He was perhaps in his mid-30s. He wore no hat, nor did he carry a dueling cane. And he looked very, very angry. What's the clarity like? Can you see a quarter in it? No, because I like my tea strong. So it usually gets darker in color. I mean, I can see the bottom of the mug. Maybe. I would have to shine a light into the tea because it's very dark in color. It's like a dark ruby red. Let's see. "What is this?" Cayman demanded. "Who are you?" How did he get by the scouts? Vin thought, struggling to get her wits back. Pain. She could deal with pain. The obligators. Did they send him? The newcomer looked down at Vin, and his expression softened slightly. Then he looked up at Cayman, and his eyes grew dark. Cayman's angry demands were cut off as he was thrown backward, as if punched by a powerful force. His arm was ripped free from Vin's shoulder, and he toppled to the ground, causing the floorboards to shake. The room fell quiet. I have to get away, Vin thought, forcing herself up to her knees. Cayman groaned in pain from a few feet away, and Vin crawled away from him, slipping beneath an unoccupied table. The lair had a hidden exit, a trapdoor beside the far back wall. If she could crawl to it... Suddenly Vin felt an overwhelming peace. The emotions slammed into her like a sudden weight. Her emotions squished silent, as if crushed by a forceful hand. Her fear puffed out like an extinguished candle, and even her pain seemed unimportant. She slowed, wondering why she had been so worried. She stood up, pausing as she faced the trapdoor. She breathed heavily, still a little dazed. Cayman just tried to kill me, the logical part of her mind warned, and someone else is attacking the lair. I have to get away. But her emotions didn't match the logic. She felt serene, unworried, and more than a little bit curious. Someone else had used luck on her. She recognized it somehow, although she'd never felt it upon her before. She paused beside the table, one hand on the wood, then slowly turned around. The newcomer still stood in the stairwell doorway. He studied her with a critical eye, then smiled in a disarming sort of way. What is going on? The newcomer finally stepped into the room. The rest of Cayman's crew remained sitting at their tables. They looked surprised, but oddly unworried. He's using luck on them all, but how can he do it to so many at once? Vin had never been able to store up enough luck to do more than give the occasional brief push. As the newcomer entered the room, Vin could finally see that a second person stood in the stairwell behind him. This second man was less imposing. He was shorter, with a dark half-beard and close-cropped straight hair. He also wore a nobleman's suit, though his was less sharply tailored. On the other side of the room, Cayman groaned and sat up, holding his head. He glanced at the newcomers. Master Dockson! Why, well, this is a surprise! Indeed, said the shorter man, Dockson. Vin frowned, realizing she sensed a slight familiarity to these men. She recognized them from somewhere. The Canton of Finance! They were sitting in the waiting room when Cayman and I left! Cayman climbed to his feet, studying the blonde newcomer. Cayman looked down at the man's hands, both of which were lined with strange, overlapping scars. By the Lord Ruler, Cayman whispered, the survivor of Hath Sin! Vin frowned. The title was unfamiliar to her. Should she know this man? Her wounds still throbbed despite the peace she felt, and her head was dizzy. She leaned on the table for support, but did not sit. Whoever this newcomer was, Cayman obviously thought him important. Why, Master Kelsier, Cayman sputtered. This is a rare honor. The newcomer, Kelsier, shook his head. You know, I'm not really interested in listening to you. Cayman let out an irk of pain as he was thrown backward again. Kelsier made no obvious gesture to perform the feat, yet Cayman collapsed to the ground as if shoved by some unseen force. Cayman fell quiet and Kelsier scanned the room. The rest of you know who I am? Many of the crew members nodded. Good. I've come to your lair because you, my friends, owe me a great debt. The room was silent, save for Cayman's groans. Finally, one of the crewmen spoke. We do, Master Kelsier? Indeed you do. You see, Master Dockson and I just saved your lives. Your rather incompetent crew leader just left the Ministry's Canton of Finance about an hour ago, returning directly to this safe house. He was followed by 2 Ministry scouts, 1 high-ranking prelin, and a single Steel Inquisitor. No one spoke. Oh Lord, Vin thought. She'd been right. But she hadn't been fast enough. If there was an Inquisitor... I dealt with the Inquisitor, Kelsier said. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. What kind of person could so lightly claim to have dealt with an Inquisitor? Rumors said the creatures were immortal, that they could see a man's soul. and that they were unmatched warriors. I require payment for services rendered, Kelsier said. Cayman didn't get up this time. He had fallen hard. And he was obviously disoriented. The room remained still. Finally, Miliv, the dark-skinned man who was Cayman's second, scooped up the coffer of ministry boxings and dashed forward with it. He proffered it to Kelsier. The money Cayman got from the ministry, Miliv explained. 3,000 boxings. Miliv is so eager to please him, Vin thought. This is more than merely luck. Either that or it's some kind of luck I've never been able to use. Kelsier paused a moment, then accepted the coin chest. And you are? Miliv, Master Kelsier. Well, crew leader Miliv, I will consider this payment satisfactory, assuming you do one other thing for me. Miliv nodded. What would that be? Kelsier nodded toward the near unconscious Cayman. Deal with him. I will see to it, Miliv said. I want him to live, Miliv, Kelsier said, holding up a finger, but I don't want him to enjoy it. Miliv nodded. We'll make him a beggar. The Lord Ruler disapproves of the profession. Cayman won't have an easy time of it here in Luthadel. And Miliv will dispose of him anyway as soon as he thinks this Kelsier isn't paying attention. Good, Kelsier said. Then he opened the coin chest and began counting out some golden boxings. You're a resourceful man, Miliv. Quick on your feet and not as easily intimidated as the others. I've had dealings with Mistings before, Master Kelsier, Miliv said. Kelsier nodded. Dox, he said, addressing his companion. Where are we going to have our meeting tonight? I was thinking we could use Club's shop, said the second man. Hardly a neutral location, Kelsier said, especially if he decides not to join us. True. Kelsier looked at Miliv. I'm planning a job in the area. It would be useful to have the support of some locals. He held out a pile of what looked like 100 boxings. We'll require the use of your safe house for the evening. This can be arranged? Of course, Miliv said, taking the coins eagerly. Good, Kelsier said. Now get out. Out? Miliv asked hesitantly. Yes, Kelsier said. Take your men, including your former leader, and leave. I want to have a private conversation with Mistress Vin. The room grew silent again, and Vin knew she wasn't the only one wondering how Kelsier knew her name. Well, you heard him, Miliv snapped. He waved for a group of thugs to go grab Cayman. Then he shooed the rest of the crew members up the stairs. Vin watched them go, growing apprehensive. This Kelsier was a powerful man, and instinct told her that powerful men were dangerous. Did he know of her luck? Obviously. What other reason would he have for singling her out? How is this Kelsier going to try and use me? She thought, rubbing her arm where she'd hit the floor. By the way, Miliv, Kelsier said idly, when I say private, I mean that I don't want to be spied on by the 4 men watching us through peepholes behind the far wall. Kindly take him up into the alley with you? Miliv paled. Yes, Master Kelsier. Good, and in the alleyway you will find 2 dead ministry spies. Kindly dispose of the corpses for us. Miliv nodded, turning. And Miliv, Kelsier added. Miliv turned back again. See that none of your men betray us, Kelsier said softly. And Vin felt it again, a renewed pressure on her emotions. This crew already has the eye of the Steel Ministry. Do not make an enemy of me as well. Tea. Miliv nodded sharply, then disappeared into the stairwell, pulling the door closed behind him. A few moments later, Vin heard footsteps from the peak room, then all was still. She was alone with a man who was, for some reason, so singularly impressive that he could intimidate an entire room full of cutthroats and thieves. She eyed the bolt door. Kelsier was watching her. What would he do if she ran? He claims to have killed an inquisitor, Vin thought, and he used luck. I have to stay, if only long enough to find out what he knows. Kelsier's smile broadened, then finally he laughed. That was far too much fun, Dox. The other men, the one Cayman had called Doxon, snorted and walked toward the front of the room. Vin tensed, but he didn't move toward her, instead strolling to the bar. You were insufferable enough before, Kel, Doxon said. I don't know how I'm going to handle this new reputation of yours. At least, I'm not sure how I'm going to handle it and maintain a straight face. You're jealous. Yes, that's it, Doxson said. I'm terribly jealous of your ability to intimidate petty criminals. If it's of any note to you, I think you were too harsh on Cayman. Kelsier walked over and took a seat at one of the room's tables. His mirth darkened slightly as he spoke. You saw what he was doing to the girl. Actually, I didn't, Doxson said dryly, rummaging through the bar's stores. Someone was blocking the doorway. Kelsier shrugged. Look at her, Dox. The poor thing's been beaten nearly senseless. I don't feel any sympathy for the man. Vin remained where she was, keeping watch on both men. As the tension of the moment grew weaker, her wounds began to throb again. The blow between her shoulder blades, that would be a large bruise. And the slap to her face burned as well. She was still a little dizzy. Kelsier was watching her. Vin clenched her teeth. Pain. She could deal with pain. You need anything, child? Doxson said. A wet handkerchief for that face, perhaps? She didn't respond, instead remaining focused on Kelsier. Come on, tell me what you want with me. Make your play. Doxson finally shrugged, then ducked beneath the bar for a moment. He eventually came up with a couple of bottles. Anything good? Kelsier asked, turning. What do you think? Doxson asked. Even among thieves, Cayman isn't exactly known for his refinement. I have socks worth more than this wine. Kelsier sighed. Give me a cup anyway. Then he glanced back at Vin. You want anything? Vin didn't respond. Kelsier smiled. Don't worry. We're far less frightening than your friends think. I don't think they were her friends, Kel, Doxson said from behind the bar. Good point, Kelsier said. Regardless, child, you don't have anything to fear from us, other than Dox's breath. Doxson rolled his eyes. Or Kel's jokes. Vin stood quietly. She could act weak the way she had with Cayman, but instincts told her these men wouldn't respond well to that tactic, so she remained where she was, assessing the situation. The calmness fell upon her again. It encouraged her to be at ease, to be trusting, to simply do as the men were suggesting. No! She stayed where she was. Kelsier raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. I'm very scared of Doxson. What? Doxson asked as he poured a cup of wine. Nothing, Kelsier said, studying Vin. You want a drink or not, lass? Doxson asked. Vin said nothing. All her life, as long as she could remember, she'd had her luck. It made her strong, and it gave her an edge over other thieves. It was probably why she was still alive. Yet all that time she'd never really known what it was or why she could use it. Logic and instinct now told her the same thing, that she needed to find out what this man knew. However he intended to use her, whatever his plans were, she needed to endure them. She had to find out how he'd grown so powerful. Ale, she finally said. Ale? Kelsier asked. That's it? Vin nodded, watching him carefully. I like it. Kelsier rubbed his chin. Well, I'll have to work on that, he said. Anyway, have a seat. And have a sip of tea. Might have put too much sugar in it, but it's still good. The acid cuts through very well. Hesitant, Vin walked over and sat down opposite Kelsier at the small table. Her wounds throbbed, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. Weakness killed. She had to pretend to ignore the pain. At least sitting as she was, her head cleared. Doxson joined them a moment later, giving Kelsier a glass of wine and Vin her mug of ale. She didn't take a drink. Who are you? She asked in a quiet voice. Kelsier raised his eyebrows again. You're a blunt one, eh? Vin didn't reply. Kelsier sighed. So much for my intriguing air of mystery. Doxson snorted quietly. Kelsier smiled. My name is Kelsier. I'm what you might call a crew leader, but I run a crew that isn't like any you've probably known. Men like Cayman along with his crew like to think of themselves as predators, feeding off the nobility and the various organizations of the ministry. Vin shook her head. Not predators, scavengers. One would have thought, perhaps, that so close to the Lord Ruler, such things as thieving crews would not be able to exist. Yet Reen had shown her that the opposite was true. Powerful, rich nobility congregated around the Lord Ruler, and where power and riches existed, so did corruption. Especially since the Lord Ruler tended to police his nobility far less than he did his ska. It had something to do with his fondness for their ancestors. Either way, thieving crews like Cayman's were the rats who fed on the city's corruption, and like rats, they were impossible to entirely exterminate, especially in a city with the population of Luthadel. Scavengers, Kelsier said, smiling. Apparently he did that a lot. That's an appropriate description, Vin. Well, Dox and I were scavengers too. We're just a higher quality of scavenger. We're more well-bred, you might say, or perhaps simply more ambitious. She frowned. You're noblemen? Lord, no, Doxson said. Or at least, Kelsier said, not full-blooded ones. Half-breeds aren't supposed to exist, Vin said carefully. The ministry hunts them. Half-breeds like you? Kelsier said. Vin felt a shock. How? The Steel Ministry isn't infallible, Vin, Kelsier said. If they can miss you, then they can miss others. Vin paused thoughtfully. Miliv, he called you Mistings. Those are some kind of allomancer, right? Doxson glanced at Kelsier. She's observant, the shorter man said with an appreciative nod. Indeed, Kelsier agreed. The men did call us Mistings, Vin. Though the appellation was a bit hasty, since neither Dox nor I are technically Mistings. We do, however, associate with them quite a bit. I just saw your message about you sitting. Vin sat quietly for a moment, beneath the scrutiny of the two men. Allomancy, the mystical power held by the nobility, granted to them by the Lord Ruler some thousands years before as a reward for their loyalty. It was basic ministry doctrine. Even a ska like Vin knew that much. The nobility had allomancy and privilege because of their ancestors. The ska were punished for the same reason. However, the truth was that she didn't really know what allomancy was. It had something to do with fighting, she'd always assumed. One misting, as they were called, was said to be dangerous enough to kill an entire thieving crew. Yet the ska, she knew, spoke of the power in whispered, uncertain tones. Before this moment, she'd never stopped to consider the possibility that it might simply be the same thing as her luck. Tell me, Vin, Kelsier said, leaning forward with interest. Do you realize what you did to that obligator in the Canton of Finance? I used my luck, Vin said softly. I use it to make people less angry. Or less suspicious, Kelsier said. Easier to scam. Vin nodded. Kelsier held up a finger. There are a lot of things you're going to have to learn. Techniques, rules, exercises, but one lesson cannot wait. Never use emotional allomancy on an obligator. They're all trained to recognize when their passions are being manipulated. Even the high nobility are forbidden from pulling or pushing the emotions of an obligator. You are what caused that obligator to send for an inquisitor. Pray the creature never catches your trail again, lass, Doxson said quietly, sipping his wine. Or his tea. Vin paled. You didn't kill the Inquisitor? Kelsier shook his head. I merely distracted him for a bit, which was quite dangerous enough, I might add. Don't worry, many of the rumors about them aren't true. Now that he's lost your trail, he won't be able to find you again. Most likely, Doxson said. Vin glanced at the shorter man apprehensively. Most likely, Kelsier agreed. There are a lot of things we don't know about the Inquisitors. They don't seem to follow the normal rules. Those spikes through their eyes, for instance, should kill them. Nothing I've learned about allomancy has ever provided an explanation for how those creatures keep living. If it were only an ordinary misting seeker on your trail, we wouldn't need to worry. An Inquisitor, well, you'll want to keep your eyes open. Of course. You already seem pretty good at that. Vin sat uncomfortably for a moment. Eventually, Kelsier nodded to her mug of ale. You aren't drinking. You might have slipped something in it, Vin said. Oh, there was no need for me to sneak something into your drink, Kelsier said with a smile, pulling an object out of his suit coat pocket. After all, you're going to drink this vial of mysterious liquid quite willingly. He set a small glass vial on the tabletop. Vin frowned, regarding the liquid within. There was a dark residue at the bottom. What is it? She asked. If I told you, it wouldn't be mysterious, Kelsier said. Doxson rolled his eyes. The vial is filled with an alcohol solution and some flakes of metal, Vin. Metal? She asked with a frown. 2 of the 8 basic elementic metals, Kelsier said. We need to do some tests. Vin eyed the vial. Kelsier shrugged. You'll have to drink it if you want to know any more about this luck of yours. You drink half first, Vin said. Kelsier raised an eyebrow. A bit on the paranoid side, I see. Vin didn't respond. Finally he sighed, picking up the vial and pulling off the plug. Shake it up first, Vin said, so you get some of the sediment. Kelsier rolled his eyes but did as requested, shaking the vial, then downing half its contents. He set it back on the table with a click. Vin frowned. Then she eyed Kelsier, who smiled. He knew that he had her. He had shown off his power, had tempted her with it. The only reason to be subservient to those with power is that you can learn to someday take what they have. Reen's words. Vin reached out and took the vial, then she downed its contents. She sat, waiting for some magical transformation or surge of power, or even signs of poison. She felt nothing. How anticlimactic. She frowned, leaning back in her chair. Out of curiosity, she felt at her luck, and felt her eyes widen in shock. It was there like a massive golden hoard, a storage of power so incredible that it stretched her understanding. Always before she had needed to be a scrimp with her luck, holding it in reserve, using up morsels sparingly. Now she felt like a starving woman invited to a high nobleman's feast. She sat stunned, regarding the enormous wealth within her. So, Kelsier said with a prodding voice, try it. Soothe me. Vin reached out, tentatively touching her newfound mass of luck. She took a bit and directed it at Kelsier. Good, Kelsier leaned forward eagerly. But we already knew you could do that. Now the real test, Vin. Can you go the other way? You can dampen my emotions, but can you inflame them too? Vin frowned. She'd never used her luck in such a way. She hadn't even realized that she could. Why was he so eager? Suspicious, Vin reached for her source of luck. As she did so, she noticed something interesting. What she had first interpreted as one massive source of power was actually 2 different sources of power. There were different types of luck. 8. He said there were 8 of them. But what do the others do? Kelsier was still waiting. Vin reached to the second unfamiliar source of luck, doing as she'd done before and directing it at him. Kelsier's smile widened and he sat back, glancing at Doxson. That's it then. She did it. Doxson shook his head. To be honest, Kel, I'm not sure what to think. Having one of you around was unsettling enough. 2, though. Vin regarded them with narrowed, dubious eyes. 2 what? Even among the nobility, Vin, allomancy is modestly rare, Kelsier said. True, it's a hereditary skill, with most of the powerful lines among the high nobility. However, breeding alone doesn't guarantee allomantic strength. Many high noblemen have access to a single allomantic skill. People like that, those who can perform allomancy only in one of its 8 basic aspects, are called mistings. Sometimes these abilities appear in Ska, but solely if that Ska has noble blood in his or her near ancestry. You can usually find one misting in, about 10,000 mixed-bred Ska. The better and closer the noble ancestry, the more likely the Ska is to be a misting. Who are your parents, Vin? Dawn asked. Do you remember them? I was raised by my half-brother Reen, Vin said quietly, uncomfortable. These were not things she discussed with others. Did he speak of your mother and father? Doxson asked. Occasionally, she admitted. Reen said that our mother was a whore. Not out of choice, but the underworld... She trailed off. Her mother had tried to kill her once, when she was very young. She vaguely remembered the event. Reen had saved her. What about your father, Vin? Doxson asked. Vin looked up. He is a high prelate in the Steel Ministry. Kelsier whistled softly. Now that's a slightly ironic breach of duty. Vin looked down at the table. Finally, she reached over and took a healthy pull on her mug of ale. Kelsier smiled. Most ranking obligators in the ministry are high noblemen. Your father gave you a rare gift in that blood of yours. So I'm one of these mistings you mentioned? Kelsier shook his head. Actually, no, you see. This is what made you so interesting to us, Vin. Mistings only have access to one allomantic skill. You just proved you have 2. And if you have access to at least 2 of the 8, then you have access to the rest as well. That's the way it works. If you're an allomancer, you either get 1 skill or you get them all. Kelsier leaned forward. You, Vin, are what is generally called a Mistborn. Even among the nobility, they're incredibly rare. Among Ska? Well, I'll simply say I've only met one other Ska Mistborn in my entire life. Somehow, the room seemed to grow more quiet, more still. Vince stared at her mug with distracted, uncomfortable eyes. Mistborn. She'd heard the stories, of course. The legends. Kelsier and Doxson sat silently, letting her think. Eventually she spoke. So what does this all mean? Kelsier smiled. It means that you, Vin, are a very special person. You have a power that most high noblemen envy. It is a power that, had you been born an aristocrat, would have made you one of the most deadly and influential people in the final empire. Kelsier leaned forward again. But you weren't born an aristocrat. You're not noble, Vin. You don't have to play by their rules. And that makes you even more powerful. That's the end of chapter 3. I've been drinking a fair bit of water, so I do need to go to the bathroom real quick. Especially in streams where I'm constantly talking, I have to drink a lot of water. But while I'm gone, I will pose a question, in case anyone chooses to respond. What do people think of the book? Just let me know what your thoughts are. I read your messages when I get back. Ah, I hit my knee. Fair. Alright. Let me move that so I have more space over here. Apparently, the next stage of my quest will take us up into the highlands of Terrace. This is said to be a cold, unforgiving place, a land where the very mountains are made of ice. Our normal attendants will not do for such a trip. We should probably hire some Terrace packmen to carry our gear. You heard what he said? He's planning a job! Yulif's eyes shone with excitement. I wonder which of the great houses he's going to strike. It'll be one of the most powerful ones, said Diston, one of Cayman's head pointmen. He was missing a hand, but his eyes and ears were among the keenest in the crew. Kelsier never bothers with small-time jobs. Vin sat quietly, her mug of ale, the one Kelsier had given her, still sitting mostly full on the tabletop. Her table was crowded with people. Kelsier had let the thieves return to their home for a bit before his meeting began. Vin would have preferred to remain by herself. Life with Reen had accustomed her to loneliness. If you let someone get too close, it would merely give them better opportunities to betray you. Even after Reen's disappearance, Vin had kept to herself. She hadn't been willing to leave. However, she also hadn't felt the need to become familiar with the other crew members. They had in turn been perfectly willing to let her alone. Vin's position had been precarious, and being around her could have tainted them by association. Only Yulif had made any moves to befriend her. If you let someone get close to you, it will just hurt more when they betray you. Reen seemed to whisper in her mind. Had Yulif really ever been her friend? He certainly sold her out quickly enough. In addition, the other crew members had taken Vin's beating and sudden rescue in stride, never mentioning their betrayal or refusal to help her. They'd only done what was expected. The survivor hasn't bothered with any jobs lately, said Harmon. Oh, an older, scraggly, bearded burglar. He's barely been seen in Luthadel a handful of times during the last few years. In fact, he hasn't pulled any jobs since... This is the first one? Yulif asked eagerly. The first since he escaped the pits? Then it's bound to be something spectacular. Did he say anything about it? Diston asked. Vin? He waved a stumpy arm in her direction, catching her attention. What? She asked, looking up. She had cleaned herself slightly since her beating at Cayman's hand, finally accepting a handkerchief from Dachshund to wipe the blood from her face. There was little she could do about the bruises, however. Those still throbbed. Hopefully nothing was broken. Kelsier, Diston repeated. Did he say anything about the job he's planning? Vin shook her head. She glanced down at the bloodied handkerchief. Kelsier and Dachshund had left a short time ago, promising to return after she'd had some time to think about the things they had told her. There was implications in their words. An offer. Whatever job they were planning, she was invited to participate. Why did he pick you to be his twixt anyway, Vin? Yulif asked. Did he say anything about that? That was what the crew assumed. That Kelsier had chosen her to be his contact with Cayman Miliv's crew. There were two sides to the Luthadel Underground. There were the regular crews, like Cayman's. Then there were the special ones. Groups composed of the extremely skillful, the extremely foolhardy, or the extremely talented Allomancers. The two sides of the underworld didn't mix. Regular thieves left their betters alone. However, occasionally one of the misting crews hired a regular thieving team to do some of its more mundane work. And they would choose a twixt, a go-between, to work with both crews. Hence Yulif's assumption about Vin. Miliv's crew members noticed her unresponsiveness, and turned to another topic, mistings. They spoke of allomancy with uncertain whispered tones, and she listened uncomfortable. How could she be associated with something they held in such awe? Her luck, her allomancy... Jeez, where did that come from? Was something small, something she used to survive, but something really quite unimportant. But such power, she thought, looking in at her luck reserve. What's Kelsier been doing these last few years, I wonder? Yulif asked. He'd seemed a bit uncomfortable around her in the beginning of the conversation, but that had passed quickly. He'd betrayed her, but this was the underworld. No friends. It didn't seem that way between Kelsier and Dachshund. They appeared to trust each other. A front? Or were they simply one of those rare teams that actually didn't worry about each other's betrayal? The most unsettling thing about Kelsier and Dachshund had been their openness with her. They seemed willing to trust, even accept Vin after a relatively short time. It couldn't be genuine. No one could survive in the underworld following such tactics. Still, their friendliness was disconcerting. 2 years, said Frud, a flat-faced quiet thug. He must have spent the entire time planning for this job. It must be some job indeed, Yulif said. Tell me about him, Vin said softly. Kelsier? No, sorry, Kelsier? Diston asked. Vin nodded. It didn't talk about Kelsier down south? Vin shook her head. He was the best crew leader in Luthadel, Yulif explained. A legend, even among the Mistings. He robbed some of the wealthiest great houses in the city. And? Vin asked. Someone betrayed him, Harmon said in a quiet voice. Of course, Vin thought. Lord Ruler himself got Kelsier, Yulif said. Sent Kelsier and his wife to the pits of Hath-Sin, but he escaped. He escaped from the pits, Vin, and he's the only one who ever has. And the wife? Vin asked. Yulif glanced at Harmon, who shook his head. She didn't make it. So he's lost someone too. How can he laugh so much, so honestly? That's where he got those scars, you know, Diston said. The ones on his arms. He got them at the pits, from the rocks on a shoe wall he had to climb to escape. Harmon snorted. That's not how he got them. He killed an Inquisitor while escaping. That's where he got the scars. I heard he got them fighting one of the monsters that guard the pits, Yulif said. He reached into its mouth and strangled it from the inside. The teeth scraped his arms. Diston frowned. How do you strangle someone from the inside? Yulif shrugged. That's just what I heard. The man isn't natural, Hrud muttered. Something happened to him in the pits. Something bad. He wasn't an Allomancer before then, you know. He entered the pits a regular Skan. Now, well, he's a Misting for sure, if he's even human anymore. Been out in the mists a lot, that one has. Some say that the real Kelsier is dead, and that the thing wearing his face is something else. Harmon shook his head again. Now, that's no more than plantation scar foolishness. We've all gone out in the mists. Not in the mists outside the city, Hrud insisted. The mist race are out there. They'll grab a man and take his face, sure as the Lord Ruler. Harmon rolled his eyes. Hrud's right about one thing, Diston said. The man isn't human. He might not be a mist wraith, but he's not Ska either. I've heard of him doing things like only they can do. Ones that come out at night. You saw what he did to Cayman. Mistborn, Harmon muttered. Mistborn. Vin had heard the term before Kelsier had mentioned it to her, of course. Who hadn't? Yet the rumors about Mistborn made stories of Inquisitors and Mistings seem rational. It was said that Mistborn were heralds of the mist, endowed with great powers by the Lord Ruler. Only high noblemen could be Mistborn. They were said to be a secret sect of assassins who served him, only going out at night. Reen had always taught her they were a myth, and Vin had assumed he was right. And Kelsier says I, like he himself, am one of them. How could she be what he said? Child of a prostitute, she was nobody. She was nothing. Never trust a man who tells you good news, Reen had always said. It's the oldest but easiest way to con someone. Yet she did have her luck, her allomancy. She could still sense the reserves Kelsier's vial had given her, and had tested her powers on the crew members. No longer limited to just a bit of luck each day, she found she could produce far more striking results. Vin was coming to realize that her old goal in life, simply staying alive, was uninspired. There was so much more she could be doing. She had been a slave to Reen. She had been a slave to Cayman. She would be a slave to this Kelsier too, if it would lead to her eventual freedom. At this point, Miliv looked at his pocket watch, then stood. All right, everyone out. The room began to clear in preparation for Kelsier's meeting. Vin remained where she was. Kelsier had made it quite clear to the others that she was invited. She sat quietly for a bit, the room feeling far more comfortable to her now that it was empty. Kelsier's friends began to arrive a short time later. The first man down the steps had the build of a soldier. He wore a loose sleeveless shirt that exposed a pair of well-sculpted arms. He was impressively muscular, but not massive, and had close-cropped hair that stuck up slightly on his head. The soldier's companion was a sharply dressed man in a nobleman's suit, plum vest, gold buttons, black overcoat, complete with short-brimmed hat and dueling cane. He was older than the soldier, and was a bit portly. He removed his hat upon entering the room, revealing a head of well-styled black hair. The two men were chatting amiably as they walked, but they paused when they saw the empty room. "Ah, this must be our Twixt," said the man in the suit. "Has Kelsier arrived yet, my dear?" He spoke with a simple familiarity, as if they were long-time friends. Suddenly, despite herself, Vin found herself liking this well-dressed, articulate man. "No," she said softly. The overalls and a work shirt had always suited her. She suddenly wished that she owned something nicer. This man's very bearing seemed to demand a more formal atmosphere. "Should have known that Kel would be late to his own meeting," the soldier said, sitting down at one of the tables near the center of the room. "Indeed," the suited man said. "I suppose his tardiness leaves us with a chance for some refreshment. I could so use something to drink." "Let me get you something," Vin said quickly, jumping to her feet. "How gracious of you," the suited man said, choosing a chair next to the soldier. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, his dueling cane held to the side, tip against the floor, one hand resting on the top. Vin walked to the bar and began rummaging for drinks. "Breeze," the soldier said with a warning tone as Vin selected a bottle of Cayman's most expensive wine and began pouring a cup. "Huh?" the suited man said, raising an eyebrow. The soldier nodded toward Vin. "Oh, very well," the suited man said with a sigh. Vin paused, wine half poured, and frowning slightly. "What am I doing?" "I swear, Ham," the suited man said, "you are dreadfully stiff sometimes." "Just because you can push someone around doesn't mean you should, Breeze." Vin stood dumbfounded. He used luck on me. When Kelsier had tried to manipulate her, she'd felt his touch and been able to resist. This time, however, she hadn't realized what she was doing. She looked up at the man, thinning her eyes. Mistborn. The suited man, Breeze, chuckled. "Hardly. Kelsier's the only Ska Mistborn you're likely to ever meet, my dear. And pray you never are in a situation where you meet a noble one. No, I am no more than an ordinary, humble misting." "Humble?" Ham asked. Breeze shrugged. Vin looked down at the half-full cup of wine. "You pulled on my emotions, with allomancy, I mean." "I pushed on them, actually," Breeze said. "Pulling makes a person less trusting and more determined. Pushing on emotions, soothing them, makes a person more trusting." "Regardless, you controlled me," Vin said. "You made me fetch you a drink." "Oh, I wouldn't say I made you do it," Breeze said. "I merely altered your emotions slightly, putting you in a frame of mind where you'd be more likely to do as I wished." Ham rubbed his chin. "I don't know, Breeze. It's an interesting question. By influencing her emotions, did you take away her ability to choose? If, for instance, she were to kill or steal while under your control, would the crime be hers or yours?" Breeze rolled his eyes. "There's really no question to it at all. You shouldn't think about such things, Hammond. You'll hurt your brain. I offered her encouragement. I simply did it through an irregular means. But I'm not going to argue it with you, Ham." The beefy man sighed, looking a little bit forlorn. "Are you going to bring me the drink?" Breeze asked hopefully, looking at Vin. "I mean, you're already up, and you're going to have to come back to this direction to reach your seat anyway." Vin examined her emotions. Did she feel irregularly drawn to do as the man asked? Was he manipulating her again? Finally, she simply walked away from the bar, leaving the drink where it was. Breeze sighed. He didn't stand to go get the drink himself, however. Vin walked tentatively toward the two men's table. She was accustomed to shadows and corners, close enough to eavesdrop, but far enough away to escape. Yet she couldn't hide from these men, not while the room was so empty. So she chose a chair at the table beside the one that the two men were using, then sat cautiously. She needed information. As long as she was ignorant, she was going to be at a severe disadvantage in this new world of misting crews. "I'd bring it to the table, then drink it while staring." Petty revenge. "I'm out of tea. That makes me sad. I know the cup can only hold so much, but I want more tea. I want a blue jug of alchemy, which can make boiling hot tea." Anyway. Breeze chuckled. Wait. Yes. Nervous little thing, aren't you? Vin ignored the comment. You, Vin said, nodding to Hem. You're a misting too? Hem nodded. I'm a thug. Vin frowned in confusion. I burn pewter, Ham said. Again, Vin looked at him questioningly. He can make himself stronger, my dear, Breeze said. He hits things, particularly other people, who try to interfere with what the rest of us are doing. There's much more to it than that, Ham said. I run general security for jobs, providing my crew leader with manpower and warriors, assuming such are necessary. And he'll try to bore you with random philosophy when it isn't, Breeze added. Ham sighed. Breeze, honestly, sometimes I don't know why I... Hem trailed off as the door opened again, admitting another man. The newcomer wore a dull tan overcoat, a pair of brown trousers, and a simple white shirt. However, his face was far more distinctive than his clothing. It was knotted and gnarled, like a twisted piece of wood. And his eyes shone with the level of disapproving dissatisfaction that only the elderly can display. Vin couldn't place his age. He was young enough that he wasn't stooped over, yet he was old enough that he made the middle-aged Breeze look youthful. Thug comes from an Indian word? Interesting. I didn't know that. The newcomer looked over Vin and the others, huffed disdainfully, then walked to a table on the other side of the room and sat down. His steps were marked by a distinct limp. Breeze sighed. I'm gonna miss Trap. We all will, Hem said quietly. Clubs is quite good, though. I've worked with him before. Breeze studied the newcomer. I wonder if I could get him to bring my drink over. Hem chuckled. I'd pay money to see you try it. I'm sure you would, Breeze said. Vin eyed the newcomer, who seemed perfectly content to ignore her and the other two men. What's he? Clubs, Breeze asked. He, my dear, is a smoker. He is what will keep the rest of us from being discovered by an inquisitor. Vin chewed on her lip, digesting the new information as she studied Clubs. The man shot her a glare and she looked away. As she turned, she noticed that Ham was looking at her. Swindle, fraud, thief. I mean, fair. He means the other definition of thug. But, yes. But, yes. I like you, kid. He said the other Twixt I've worked with have either been too intimidated to talk to us or they've been jealous of us for moving into their territory. Indeed, Breeze said. You're not like most crumbs I see. I'd like you a great deal more if you'd go fetch me that glass of wine. Vin ignored him, glancing at Ham. Crumb? Oh, Thag. Yeah. 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 Vin ignored him. Wait, sorry. That's what some of the more self-important members of our society call lesser thieves, Ham said. They call you crumbs since you tend to be involved in less inspired projects. No offense intended, Breeze said. Oh, I would never take offense at... Vin broke off, feeling an irregular desire to please the well-dressed man. She glared at Breeze. Stop that! See there? Breeze said, glancing at him. She still retains her ability to choose. You're hopeless. They assume I'm a Twixt, Vin thought. So Kelsier hasn't told them what I am. Why? Time constraints? Or is the secret too valuable to share? How trustworthy were these men? And if they thought her a simple crumb, why were they being so nice to her? Who else are we waiting upon? Breeze asked, glancing at the door. Wait. Besides Kel and Dox, I mean. Eden, Hem said. Breeze frowned with a sour expression. Ah, yes. I agree, Hem said, but I'd be willing to bet that he feels the same way about us. I don't even see why he was invited, Breeze said. Ham shrugged. Something to do with Kel's plan, obviously. Ah, the infamous plan, Breeze said musingly. What job could it be? What indeed? Ham shook his head. Kel and his cursed sense of drama. Indeed. The door opened a few moments later, and the one they had spoken of, Eden, entered. He turned out to be an unassuming man, and Vin had trouble understanding why the other two were so displeased about his attendance. Short, with curly brown hair, Eden was dressed in simple gray ska clothing and a patched, soot-stained brown worker's coat. He regarded the surroundings with a look of disapproval, but he was nowhere near as openly hostile as Clubs, who still sat on the other side of the room, scowling at anyone who looked in his direction. Not a very big crew, Vin thought. With Kelsier and Doxson, that makes 6 of them. Although Hammond said that he led a group of thugs. Were the men at this meeting simply representatives? The leaders of smaller, more specialized groups? Some crews worked that way. Breeze checked his pocket watch 3 more times before Kelsier finally arrived. The Mistborn crew leader burst through the door with his cheery enthusiasm, Doxson sauntering along behind. Ham stood immediately, smiling broadly and clasping hands with Kelsier. Breeze stood as well, and while his greeting was a bit more reserved, Vin had to admit she had never seen any crew leader welcomed so happily by his men. Ah, Kelsier said, looking towards the other side of the room. Clubs in Yaden too, so everyone's here. Good, I absolutely loathe being made to wait. Breeze raised an eyebrow as he and Ham settled back into their chairs. Doxson taking a seat at the same table. Are we to receive any explanation for your tardiness? Doxson and I were visiting my brother, Kel explained, walking toward the front of the lair. He turned and leaned back against the bar, scanning the room. When Kelsier's eyes fell on Vin, he winked. Your brother? Ham said. Is Marsh coming to the meeting? Kelsier and Doxson shared a look. Not tonight, Kelsier said, but he'll join the crew eventually. Vin studied the others. They were skeptical. Tension between Kelsier and his brother, perhaps? Breeze raised his dueling cane, pointing the tip at Kelsier. All right, Kelsier, you've kept this job secret from us for 8 months now. We know it's big, we know you're excited, and we're all properly annoyed at you for being so secretive. So why not simply go ahead and tell us what it is? And don't inhale water. Kelsier smiled, then he stood up straight, waving a hand toward the dirty, plain-looking Yin. Gentlemen, meet your new employer. This was apparently quite a shocking statement. Him? Ham asked. Him, Kelsier said with a nod. What? Yaden asked, speaking for the first time. You have trouble working with someone who actually has morals. It's not that, my dear man, Breeze said, settling his dueling cane across his lap. It's just that, well, I was under the strange impression that you didn't like our types very much. I don't, Yaden said flatly. You're selfish, undisciplined, and you've turned your backs on the rest of the ska. You dress nicely, but on the inside you're dirty as ash. Ham snorted. I can already see that this job is going to be great for crew morale. Vin watched quietly, chewing on her lip. Yaden was obviously a ska worker, probably a member of a forge or a textile mill. What connection did he have with the underground? And how would he be able to afford the services of a thieving crew, especially one as apparently specialized as Kelsier's team? Perhaps Kelsier noticed her confusion, for she found him looking at her as the others continued to speak. I'm still a little confused, Ham said. Yaden, we're all aware of how you regard thieves, so why hire us? Yaden squirmed a bit. Because, he finally said, everyone knows how effective you are. Breeze chuckled. Disapproving of our morals doesn't make you unwilling to make use of our skills, I see. So what is this job, then? What does the Ska Rebellion wish of us? Ska Rebellion, Vin thought, a piece of the conversation falling into place. There were 2 sides of the underworld. The far larger portion was made up of thieves, crews, whores, and beggars who tried to survive outside the mainstream ska culture. And then there were the rebels. The people who worked against the final empire. Reen had always called them fools. A sentiment shared by most of the people, both underworlders and regular ska, that Vin had met. All eyes slowly turned to Kelsier, who leaned back against the bar again. The Ska Rebellion, courtesy of its leader Yeden, has hired us for something very specific. What? Ham asked. Robbery? Assassination? Little of both, Kelsier said, and at the same time neither one. Gentlemen, this will be no ordinary job. It's going to be different from anything any crew has ever tried to pull. We're going to help Yeden overthrow the final empire. Silence. Excuse me, Ham asked. You heard me right, Ham, Kelsier said. That's the job I've been planning, the destruction of the final empire, or at least its center of government. Yeden has hired us to supply him with an army, then provide him with a favorable opportunity to seize control of the city. Ham sat back, then shared a glance with Breeze. Both men turned toward Dachshund, who nodded solemnly. The room remained quiet for a moment longer. Then the silence was broken as Yeden began to laugh ruefully to himself. I should never have agreed to this, Yeden said, shaking his head. Now that you say it, I realize how ridiculous it all sounds. Trust me, Yeden, Kelsier said. These men have made a habit of pulling off plans that seem ridiculous at first glance. That may be true, Kel, Breeze said, but in this case I find myself agreeing with our disapproving friend. Overthrow the final empire? That's something the Ska rebels have been working on for 1,000 years. What makes you think we can achieve anything where those men have failed? Kelsier smiled. We'll succeed because we have vision, Breeze. That's something the rebellion has always lacked. Excuse me, Yeden said indignantly. It's true, unfortunately, Kelsier said. The rebellion condemns people like us because of our greed, but for all their high morals, which, by the way, I respect, they never get anything done. Yeden, your men hide in woods and in hills, plotting how they'll someday rise up and lead a glorious war against the final empire, but your kind has no idea how to develop and execute a proper plan. Yeden's expression grew dark. And you have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, Kelsier said lightly. Tell me, what has your rebellion accomplished during its 1,000-year struggle? Where are your successes and your victories? The massacre of Tugyar 3 centuries ago, where 7,000 Ska rebels were slaughtered? The occasional raid of a traveling canal boat, or the kidnapping of a minor noble official? Yeden flushed. That's the best we can manage with the people we have. Don't blame my men for their failures, blame the rest of the Ska. We can't ever get them to help. They've been beaten down for a millennium. They haven't got any spirit left. It's difficult enough to get 1 in 1,000 to listen to us, let alone rebel. Peace, Yeden, Kelsier said, holding up a hand. I'm not trying to insult your courage. We're on the same side, remember? You came to me specifically because you were having trouble recruiting people for your army. I'm regretting that decision more and more, thief, Yeden said. Well, you've already paid us, Kelsier said, so it's a little late to back out now. But we'll get you that army, Yeden. The men in this room are the most capable, most clever, and most skilled allomancers in the city. You'll see. The room grew quiet again. Vin sat at her table, watching the interaction with a frown. What is your game, Kelsier? His words about overthrowing the final empire were obviously a front. It seemed most likely to her that he intended to scam the Ska rebellion, but if he'd already been paid, then why continue the charade? Kelsier turned from Yeden to Breeze and Ham. All right, gentlemen, what do you think? The two men shared a look. Finally, Breeze spoke. Lord Ruler knows I've never been one to turn down a challenge, but Kel, I do question your reasoning. Are you sure we can do this? I'm positive, Kelsier said. Previous attempts to overthrow the Lord Ruler have failed because they lacked proper organization and planning. We're thieves, gentlemen, and we're extraordinarily good ones. We can rob the unrobbable and fool the unfoolable. We know how to take an incredibly large task and break it down to manageable pieces, then deal with each of those pieces. We know how to get what we want. These things make us perfect for this particular task. Hi, girl. Hi, Callie. Hi. My cat's being cute. Hey, come here. Come here. Sevenish against the Phoenix? What? I don't understand. Breeze frowned. And how much are we getting paid for achieving the impossible? 30,000 boxings, Eden said. Half now, half when you deliver the army. 30,000, Ham said. For an operation this big? That'll barely cover expenses. We'll need a spy among the nobility to watch for rumors. We'll need a couple of safe houses, not to mention someplace big enough to hide and train an entire army. No use haggling now, thief, Eden snapped. 30,000 may not sound like much to your type, but it's the result of decades of saving on our part. We can't pay you more because we don't have anything more. It's good work, gentlemen, Doxson noted, joining the conversation for the first time. Yes, well, that's all great, Breeze said. I consider myself a nice enough fellow, but this seems a bit too altruistic, not to mention stupid. Well, Kelsier said, there might be a little bit more in it for us. Vin perked up and Breeze smiled. The Lord Ruler's treasury, Kelsier said. The plan as it stands now is to provide Yaden with an army and an opportunity to seize the city. Once he takes over the palace, he'll capture the treasury and use its funds to secure power. And central to that treasury is the Lord Ruler's ATM, Breeze said. Kelsier nodded. Our agreement with Yaden promises us half the ATM reserves we find in the palace, no matter how vast they may be. ATM. Vin had heard of the metal, but she had never actually seen any. It was incredibly rare, supposedly used only by noblemen. Ham was smiling. Well now, he said slowly, that's almost a big enough prize to be tempting. That ATM stockpile is supposed to be enormous, Kelsier said. The Lord Ruler sells the metal only in small bits, charging outrageous sums to the nobility. He has to keep a huge reserve of it to make certain he controls the market, and to make certain he has enough wealth for emergencies. Not the Lord Ruler's ATM! Yes, take his ATM. True, Breeze said, but are you sure you want to try something like this so soon after what happened the last time we tried getting into the palace? We are going to do things differently this time, Kelsier said. Gentlemen, I'll be frank with you. This isn't going to be an easy job, but it can work. The plan is simple. We're going to find a way to neutralize the Luthadel garrison, leaving the area without a policing force. Then we're going to throw the city into chaos. We've got a couple options on how to do that, Doxson said, but we can talk about that later. Kelsier nodded. Then in that chaos, Yaden will march his army into Luthadel and seize the palace, taking the Lord Ruler prisoner. While Yaden secures the city, we'll pilfer the ATM. We'll give half to him, then disappear with the other half. After that, it's his job to hang on to what he's grabbed. Sounds like a dangerous job for you, Yaden, Ham noted, glancing at the rebel leader. He shrugged. Perhaps, but if we do by some miracle end up in control of the palace, then we'll have at least done something no Ska rebellion has ever achieved before. For my men, this isn't just about riches. It isn't even about surviving. It's about doing something grand. Something wonderful. To give the Ska hope. But I don't expect you people to understand things like that. Kelsier shot a quieting glance at Yaden, and the man sniffed and sat back. Did he use allomancy? Vin wondered. She'd seen employer-crew relationships before, and it seemed that Yaden was much more in Kelsier's pocket than the other way around. Kelsier turned back to Ham and Breeze. Let's see. There's more to all of this than... Yes? Yes, Callie? There's more to all of this than simply a show of daring. If we do manage to steal that ATM, it will be a sound blow to the Lord Ruler's financial foundation. He depends on the money that ATM provides. Without it, he could very well be left without the money or the means to pay his armies. Even if he escapes our trap, or if we decide to take the city when he's gone to minimize having to deal with them, he'll be financially ruined. He won't be able to march soldiers in to take the city away from Yaden. If this works right, we'll have the city in chaos anyway, and the nobility will be too weak to react against the rebel forces. The Lord Ruler will be left confused and unable to mount a sizable army. And the Koloss? Ham asked quietly. Kelsier shook his head. If he marches those creatures on his own capital city, the destruction it would cause would be more dangerous than financial instability. In the chaos, the provincial noblemen will rebel and set themselves up as kings, and the Lord Ruler won't have the troops to bring them into line. Aiden's rebels will be able to hold Luthadel, and we, my friends, will be very, very rich. Everyone gets what they want. You're forgetting the Steel Ministry, Club snapped, sitting almost forgotten at the side of the room. Those Inquisitors won't just let us throw their pretty theocracy into chaos. Callie, you're moving things. Come here. Let's see. Oh no, where'd it go? Kelsier turned toward the gnarled man. We will have to find a way to deal with the Ministry. I've got a few plans for that. Either way, problems like that are the things that we as a crew will have to work out. We have to get rid of the Luthadel garrison. There's no way we'll be able to get anything done with them policing the streets. We'll have to come up with an appropriate way to throw the city into chaos, and we'll have to find a way to keep the obligators off our trail. But if we play this right, we might be able to force the Lord Ruler to send the palace guard, maybe even the Inquisitors, into the city to restore order. That will leave the palace exposed, giving Yin a perfect opportunity to strike. After that, it won't matter what happens with the Ministry or the garrisons. The Lord Ruler won't have the money to maintain control of his empire. I don't know, Kel, Breeze said, shaking his head. His flippancy was subdued. He seemed to be honestly considering the plan. The Lord Ruler got that ATM somewhere. What if he simply goes and mines some more? Hem nodded. And no one knows where the ATM mine is. I wouldn't say no one, Kelsier said with a smile. Breeze and Hem shared a look. You know? Hem asked. Naturally, Kelsier said. I spent a year of my life working there. The pits? Hem asked with surprise. Kelsier nodded. That's why the Lord Ruler makes certain nobody survives working there. He can't afford to let his secret out. It's not just a penal colony. Not just a hellhole where Scar sent to die. It's a mine. Of course, Breeze said. Kelsier stood up straight, stepping away from the bar and walking toward Ham and Breeze's table. We have a chance here, gentlemen. A chance to do something great. Something no other thieving crew has ever done. We'll rob from the Lord Ruler himself. But there's more. The pits nearly killed me, and I've seen things differently since I escaped. I see the Ska working without hope. I see the thieving crews trying to survive on aristocratic leavings, often getting themselves and other Ska killed in the process. I see the Ska rebellion trying so hard to resist the Lord Ruler and never making any progress. The rebellion fails because it's too unwieldy and spread out. Anytime one of its many pieces gains momentum, the Steel Ministry crushes it. That's not the way to defeat the final empire, gentlemen. But a small team, specialized and highly skilled, has a hope. We work without great risk of exposure. We know how to avoid the Steel Ministry's tendrils. We understand how the high nobility thinks and how to exploit its members. We can do this. He stopped beside Breeze and Ham's table. I don't know, Kel, Ham said. It's not that I'm disagreeing with your motives, but this seems a bit foolhardy. Kelsier smiled. I know it does, but you're going to go along with it anyway, aren't you? Ham paused, then nodded. You know I'll join your crew no matter what the job. This sounds crazy, but so do most of your plans. Just tell me, are you serious about overthrowing the Lord Ruler? Kelsier nodded. For some reason, Vin was almost tempted to believe him. Ham nodded firmly. All right then, I'm in. Breeze? Kelsier asked. The well-dressed man shook his head. I'm not sure, Kel. This is a bit extreme even for you. We need you, Breeze, Kel said. No one can soothe the crowd like you can. If we're going to raise an army, we'll need your allomancers and your powers. Well, that much is true, Breeze said, but even still. Kelsier smiled. Then he set something on the table, the cup of wine Vin had poured for Breeze. She hadn't noticed that Kelsier had grabbed it off the bar. Think of the challenge, Breeze, Kelsier said. Breeze glanced at the cup, then looked up at Kelsier. Finally he laughed, reaching for the wine. Fine, I'm in. It's impossible, a gruff voice said from the back of the room. Club sat with folded arms, regarding Kelsier with a scowl. What are you really planning, Kelsier? I'm being honest, Kelsier replied. I plan to take the Lord Ruler's A-team and overthrow his empire. You can't, the man said. It's idiocy. The Inquisitors will hang us all by hooks through our throats. Perhaps, Kelsier said, but think of the reward if we succeed. Wealth, power, and a land where the Ska can live like men rather than slaves. Club snorted loudly. Then he stood, his chair toppling backward onto the floor behind him. No reward would be enough. The Lord Ruler tried to have you killed once. I see that you won't be satisfied until he gets it right. With that, the older man turned and stalked in a limping gait from the room, slamming the door behind him. The lair grew quiet. Well, guess you'll need a different smoker, Doxson said. You're just going to let him go? Eden demanded. He knows everything. Brady chuckled. Aren't you supposed to be the moral one in this little group? Morals have nothing to do with it, Eden said. Letting someone go like that is foolish. He could bring the obligators down on us in minutes. Vin nodded in agreement, but Kelsier shook his head. I don't work that way, Eden. I invited clubs to a meeting where I outlined a dangerous plan. One some people might even call stupid. I'm not going to have him assassinated because he decided it was too dangerous. If you do things like that, pretty soon nobody will come to listen to your plans in the first place. Besides, Doxson said, we wouldn't invite someone to one of these meetings unless we trusted him not to betray us. Impossible, Vin thought, frowning. He had to be bluffing to keep up crew morale. Nobody was that trusting. After all, hadn't the others said that Kelsier's failure a few years before, the event that had sent him to the pits of Hassin, had come because of a betrayal? He certainly had assassins following clubs that very moment, watching to make certain he didn't go to the authorities. Ah, my voice. How much longer is this chapter? I'm going to finish this chapter. Probably a mistake, but I'm going to do it. Alright, Yaden, Kelsier said, getting back to business. They accepted. The plan is on. You still in? Will you give the rebellion's money back if I say no? Yaden asked. The single response to that was a quiet chuckle from Ham. Yaden's expression darkened, but he only shook his head. If I had any other option. Oh, stop complaining, Kelsier said. You're officially part of a thieving crew now, so you might as well come over here and sit with us. Yaden hesitated a moment, then sighed and walked over to the table. Running a crew like this out will only get you killed by those you rat to. Yeah. Anyone who's considering overthrowing an empire is really not someone you should rat out. Because either they or... Actually, yeah, if you're invited to a meeting by a crew like this, and you try to rat them out, you're gonna get killed for getting invited to the meeting. Yaden hesitated a moment, then sighed and walked over to the table next to Vin's and took a seat alongside Breeze, Ham, and Doxson, with Kelsier still lingering nearby. Kelsier turned, looking towards Vin. What about you, Vin? Wiser than I look, see? Yes, you are. She gazed back at him. Why is he asking me? He already knows that he has a hold over me. The job doesn't matter as long as I learn what he knows. Kelsier waited expectantly. I'm in, Vin said, assuming that was what he wanted to hear. She must have guessed correctly, for Kelsier smiled, then nodded to the last chair at the table. Vin sighed, but did as he indicated, standing and walking over to take the last seat. Who is the child? Eden asked. Twixt, Breeze said. Kelsier cocked an eyebrow. Actually, Vin is something of a new recruit. My brother caught her soothing his emotions a few months back. Soother, eh? Ham said. We can always use another one of those. Actually, Kelsier noted, it seems she can ride people's emotions as well. Breeze started. Really? Ham asked. Kelsier nodded. Dox and I tested her a few hours ago. Breeze chuckled, and here I was telling her that she'd probably never meet another Mistborn besides herself. A second Mistborn on the team, Ham said appreciatively. Well, that increases our chances somewhat. What are you saying, Yaden sputtered? Scott can't be Mistborn. I'm not even sure if Mistborn exist. I've certainly never met one. Breeze raised an eyebrow, then laid a hand on Yaden's shoulder. You should try not to talk so much, friend, he suggested. You'll sound far less stupid that way. Eden shook off Breeze's hand and Ham laughed. Vin sat quietly, pondering the implications of what Kelsier had said. The part about stealing the ATM reserves was tempting, but seizing the city to do it? Were these men really that reckless? Kelsier pulled a chair over the table for himself and sat down on it the wrong way, resting his arms on the seat back. All right, he said. We have a crew. We'll plan specifics at the next meeting, but I want you all to be thinking about the job. I have some plans, but I want fresh minds to consider our task. Willing to discuss ways to get the Luthadel garrison out of the city, and ways we can throw this place into so much chaos that the great houses can't mobilize their forces to stop Yeden's army when it attacks. The members of the group save Yeden nodded. Before we end for the evening, however, Kelsier continued, there is one more part of the plan I'd like to warn you about. More? Bree said with a chuckle. Stealing the Lord Ruler's fortune and overthrowing his empire aren't enough? No, Kelsier said. If I can, I'm going to kill him too. Silence. Kelsier, Ham said slowly. The Lord Ruler is the sliver of infinity. He's a piece of God himself. You can't kill him. Even capturing him will probably prove impossible. Kelsier didn't reply, but his eyes were determined. That's it, Vin thought. He has to be insane. The Lord Ruler and I, Kelsier said, we have an unsettled debt. He took Mare from me, and he nearly took my own sanity as well. I'll admit to you all that part of my reason for this job is to get revenge on him. We're going to take his government, his home, and his fortune from him. For that to work, we'll have to get rid of him. Perhaps imprison him in his own dungeons at the very least. We'll have to get him out of the city, but I can think of something far better than either option. If it bleeds, we can kill it. No one's seen the Lord Ruler bleed. Make it bleed so we can kill it. Down in those pits where he sent me, I snapped and awakened my elementic powers. Now I intend to use them to kill him. Kelsier reached into his suit pocket and pulled something out. He set it on the table. In the north, they have a legend, Kelsier said. It teaches that the Lord Ruler isn't immortal, not completely. They say he can be killed with the right metal, the 11th metal. That metal. Eyes turned toward the object on the table. It was a thin bar of metal, perhaps as long and wide as Vin's small finger, with straight sides. It was silvery white in color. The 11th metal? Breeze asked uncertainly. I've heard of no such legend. Lord Ruler has suppressed it, Kelsier said, but it can still be found if you know where to look. Elementic theory teaches of 10 metals. The 8 basic metals and the 2 high metals. However, there is another one, unknown to most. One far more powerful than the other 10. Breeze frowned skeptically. But Eden appeared intrigued. And this metal can somehow kill the Lord Ruler? Kelsier nodded. It's his weakness. The Steel Ministry wants you to believe that he's immortal, but he can be killed by an Allomancer burning this. Ham reached out, picking up the thin bar of metal. Where did you get it? In the north, Kelsier said, in a land near the far peninsula. A land where people still remember what their old kingdom was called in the days before the Ascension. How does it work? Breeze asked. I'm not sure, Kelsier said frankly, but I intend to find out. Ham regarded the porcelain-colored metal, turning it over in his fingers. Kill the Lord Ruler? Vin thought. The Lord Ruler was a force, like the winds or the mists. One did not kill such things. They didn't really live, they simply were. Regardless, Kelsier said, accepting the metal back from Ham. You don't need to worry about this. Killing the Lord Ruler is my task. If it proves impossible, we'll settle for tricking him out of the city. And then robbing him silly. I just thought that you should know what I'm planning. I've bound myself to a madman, Vin thought with resignation. But that didn't really matter. Not as long as he taught her allomancy. And that is the end of chapter 4. We're about a sixth of the way through the book. The book sounded a lot bigger when I closed it. Well, Overthrowing a god king is never an easy task. But that is where we'll be ending today's stream. In terms of streams going forward, we have... I do not stream tomorrow, but Luna does. I do stream tomorrow. Sorry, brain cell. Luna does not stream tomorrow. I got that very backwards. At 11 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, I'll be playing some Planet Crafter. Got to a weird part in the game. The game's very different. And at 5 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, I'll be playing some King of the Castle. So make sure to tune into that, as it requires viewer interaction. It's pretty fun. Right. So, if you want to get informed of when I go live, make sure to follow me on Twitter or join our Discord to get informed of when any of us go live, as well as being able to talk with us or members of our community. Or join Vakia's cult. Whatever you want. Also, if you like what you saw, make sure to follow here. We're close to affiliating the Foxpaw Promise. The counter's off. We're about 6 away. Also, if you want to see more, or you can't watch when I stream, make sure to check out YouTube. I post all my videos there, treated as an archive, except for the few unarchived videos. There are also some YouTube exclusive videos. So make sure to look at those. Our new D&D campaign is a YouTube exclusive. Currently there's only one episode posted, and it's a recap, so it's a little short, but there will be more in the future. Coming soon. As soon as I can edit them. But regardless, as I have been saying lately, non refert ubies, solem refert quid facias. Saving the universe, one Mistborn at a time. Starseeker Williams, out.